Welcome to Talk South Asian to Me. My name is Michelle.
And my name is Anusha. Tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. Central and hear us react to each other's stories about mental health and growing up in different South Asian households.
And remember, this podcast is not therapy. Engage with what feels entertaining and resonates with you, and leave what doesn't. Okay, so now it is our letter reveal for the letter M. Are you ready?
Woohoo! I'm ready.
So, our topic is marriage and the pressure and expectations that come with marriage. Yes, it's a big one, right? It is spicy. I like that word. It's spicy. I feel like so many people have so much to say with this topic. I'm sure, including both of us. So, I want to I was like, when I was doing reading on this and learning a little bit more, and I was, a lot of researchers and different authors writing about this topic, I love the kind of comparison that they would provide. And it was like an overarching theme. So, first of all, marriage in general, maybe you would agree, and if you don't, you can tell me, Anusha, that it's something that many people in our current society as a whole looks at as an aspiration, a goal, something to look forward to in life. Would you agree?
I think so, yeah. It's definitely one of those like milestones.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a lot of people will date with the intention of marrying, settle down, right? Not everyone, but a lot of people that's like their intention to date is to marry, to find that one partner, to settle down. But that overarching theme that I was telling you about when it comes to the South Asian culture and compared to, the Westernized society and culture, it's kind of like marriage in the South Asian culture is viewed as a collective act, like a communal act. While the Westernized society views marriage as more of an individual act. So it's individualistic.
Yeah.
And I thought that
like
was a great comparison.
Families.
Yeah, we hear that a lot. And, marriage being like a duty for the family, right?
Yeah.
Carrying the family name, means a lot to the family. Who you marry and, what kind of person you're marrying to, not only like the character, but like what family they come from, what religion they practice, what culture were they raised in. All those things mean so much. Whereas a lot of marriages in the Westernized world, it's more of like an individual choice and an individual kind of preference instead of the family kind of being part of the decision as well. Yeah.
So true.
Yes.
Yeah. That definitely lines up with what I've observed too within just generally experiences and like how people are on this topic. That feels pretty accurate.
Yes. So now I'm going to make it a little bit spicier. Okay.
Ooh, I'm ready.
So, yes. So
spill the chai. I'm ready.
Yes. So do you feel like, this is a question for you. Do you feel like nowadays there are more and more people thinking about marriage as a priority or not? And what do you think? That's in general, but also that question in the South Asian community.
Okay. Is it a priority
spicy, right?
or not? Okay.
Yeah, out of all the things, ambitions in life, inspirations, do you feel like marriage is always number one for everybody? And if so, why or why not?
Okay. Here's what I see. I think that it still remains a priority, but I think the shift is in it being a priority, not the priority. Typically like in the past, right? It was always like, okay, you graduated. Okay, great. Okay, you got a job. Okay, great. Okay, now get married. Okay, now have kids. It was very like next.
Yeah.
And I still think that's like maybe parent generation that still is kind of somewhat of a hope. But I feel like for more like our generation, it's still a priority, I think, for a lot of people, but it's not like the one thing that I have to work towards and achieve and accomplish and make happen ASAP. It's one of the things that I do in addition to my career or in addition to other interests.
Yeah. So that's kind of like maybe general. What about, do you think individuals? Do you feel like those people that are expected to get married, right?
Yeah.
Do those individuals marriage a priority for them?
That's a good question. I think that depends on I think that depends on their particular like relationship with the person who
Yeah.
is like pressuring them, right? I feel like
Mhm.
for some people where it's an expectation, it's easy to fall into that trap of like
Mhm. Mhm.
pressuring yourself into making that a goal.
Yeah.
So yes and no. No,
Yeah.
because some people, dispositions, personalities, enough independence might make them feel like, you know what, that's your goal. I don't need to be, you know, pressured
Mhm.
into this. So
Yeah.
yes and no.
No, that makes sense to me. And going along those lines, I found an article, a Juggernaut article titled "Why
Yeah.
More South Asians Are Rejecting Marriage," and they discuss some
Mm.
statistics. The author does.
Okay.
According to the Pew Research Center, more and more couples in the US are living unpartnered. So that's in general,
Hmm.
right? And then in 2019, 38% of adults in the US between the ages of 25 and 54 were neither married nor living with a partner. And in
Mm.
1990, that was only 29%. So it went from 29% to 38%
Wow.
of those
That does
people.
surprise me.
Yes. Yes. And then
The number's a
going,
lot larger than I would have thought, actually.
yeah, I agree. When I was reading this, I was like, wow, there's a lot of people. And
Mm.
going into like more of the South Asian community or demographics in 2012, among the US Asian groups in general, Indian Americans are most likely to be married, but it's only 71% of the entire
Mm.
statistic. So again,
Between
that
that age of
30%,
between
and
that
that
age
30,
of 20 something to 40
I
something?
think it
Is that
was
what you
listed
said?
as a separate statistic, but
Oh, okay.
that means that 30% of those Indian Americans are not married and not living with a partner.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um,
That's interesting.
so yeah, I'm surprised with these numbers. That was actually the
Yeah.
question I was going to ask you. Like,
Well,
why
I
why
wonder
do you think there's a
what is,
decrease?
but I wonder like what is the audience are sampling from? When I hear of statistics quite like this,
Hmm.
one, yeah, that could just be like in our communities, our worlds in
Hmm.
particular, perhaps we don't have that exposure. But I mean,
Hmm.
that number does seem a lot larger than I would have thought. So I'm
Yeah,
curious, like, how are they coming up with a statistic? Like, what is this age range?
yeah,
What are
yeah.
some of
I
the other
think it's the same
characteristics?
25 to 54. And didn't really look into
Mm,
the Pew Research Center, but I know it's like with the US, like census and like that.
mm,
So, but I think it's so interesting,
yeah,
just like these numbers. But definitely
yeah.
would like to look into this research statistics more too, to see the sources
Hmm.
and where it comes from. But
That's very
even
cool.
just being like this type of information being out there is just so interesting to me. And
Yeah.
why I want to wonder, like, why is there a decrease
Mm, yeah. What
in those
What do you think?
marriages?
Like, I have an idea. Why do you think there is such a huge, well, huge quotation mark, quote unquote huge number? 38% you said, was it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Well,
why do you
71%
think?
are married. Yeah.
Yeah, why do you think the percentage of that population is a little larger than we think?
I don't know. I think just when it comes to South Asian cultures specifically and South Asian Americans, maybe one of the previous podcast episodes that we talked about like
Mhm.
biculturalism and how we talked about the individualistic versus a communal act can be a clash for individuals,
Mhm.
about like, oh,
Yeah.
they want marriage to be their own, but maybe their partner is not accepted, right? Like all these different things of like
Mm.
causing them maybe not to be married or not want to be married or pressures, right? Like a lot of
Yeah.
like reverse psychology, like the more you're pressured, the more
Mm.
you're like, no, I'm not going to do it,
I don't
or
want to.
other
Yeah.
priorities, right? Like career or other ambitions
Yeah.
or other goals in life that are a higher priority than marriage.
Mm.
What about
Yeah.
you? What do you think?
I so I don't have a formulated full-on thought about this, but what comes up for me when I think about this number, which genuinely is a little bit shocking to me, I think a piece of that is at least that we are more comfortable as a generation waiting a little longer to
Mm-hmm.
find that partner that's right for us. And sometimes that process just takes a little while
Yeah.
because everybody's on different, like, priorities, right? Some people are like, okay, let's get our career started. I want to hit
Mm-hmm.
this amount before I even like, I'm ready for marriage, before I'm ready for XYZ. So I think that at least a part of it is we're more comfortable waiting for the right person for us. And we're not
Mm-hmm.
just like, let's just get married to get married. So I think a lot of things
Yes.
are being pushed back. I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast, but, we've talked about how people are even pushing like having kids,
Yeah.
typically the idea was, right, like this idea of like you have to get, pregnant before you're 30, otherwise like it's not safe for you, it's not safe for the baby, blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really actually rare. A lot of people are waiting until like after 30 because of whatever reason, whether they want
Yeah.
to, prioritize other things, whether they want to like save up, whether they want to, just accomplish some more things, whatever the reason might be. I think in general, we are tending to push our timelines a little bit further.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder
Mm-hmm.
if that partly plays into it or what else plays
Yeah.
into it. I'm so curious.
Yeah. And I agree. Like these numbers, we have to take them as a grain of salt. Like it's not the full truth always. And
Mm.
that, research is done at a point of time. And like you said, with time, things change. So even if the timelines change, that there has to be, or hopefully there is more research out there that, takes into account timelines,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
longitudinal studies, and looks at like, okay, how
Yeah.
long maybe does a typical South Asian American take to get married from a certain
Mm.
age, right? That would be interesting to look
Yeah.
at those numbers. So
That would be. You know,
yeah.
as you were saying that though, what occurred to me is I wonder if it's also possible that some of these people in the statistic are like now single. But like,
Hmm.
were they married before and they're divorced
Yeah,
now? Were
that's
they
true.
living with partners but are not now?
Yeah.
Maybe
What are the
like,
factors,
yeah, maybe it's all about the timing.
variables? I agree.
Mm.
So now we've kind of like talked about some numbers, right? I want to kind of
Mm.
dive into a little bit more about the South Asian culture and how it relates to
Yeah.
marriage. So we kind of talked a little bit, right? Just the values, the collectivism, the
Mm.
communal, and like the community being involved, the family being involved. I want to kind of aim to like talk a little bit more about the words arranged marriage. We hear that a lot,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
What would your definition be of arranged marriage?
Okay. Well, arranged marriage. When I think of arranged marriage, I think of two things. I think of one, the older tradition of parents choosing somebody for you meeting
Hmm.
them, and for the most part, not having much need. Well, I don't know if I'd say need, but not having much opportunity to date before you just like, yeah, okay, fine. I'll talk to you for like a week, two
Hmm.
weeks, a month. And then, okay, well, like we're good. Now I see arranged marriage in like modern times more so as whether it be parents, whether it be like aunts and uncles or just random like elders in the community, maybe even friends who make you aware of certain people
Yeah.
who you might be interested in, like a real life dating app, and
Hmm.
then giving you the opportunity to like date, get to know them, and then let you handle what you want to handle. And then if
Yeah.
that's successful, great. It's technically
Yeah.
sort of arranged love, let's
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. No,
That's
that
kind
was
of
on
how
point.
I see it.
Yeah. I feel like that's on point. I point. I feel like sometimes when people hear the word arranged marriage, it could go into that stereotypical older
Yeah.
tradition where like, you don't even see the person you're marrying until the day of. Whereas like,
Mm,
the arranged marriage could be like the loose term of arranged marriage, which is like
yeah.
you're introduced. There's mutual connections and networks, and that's how you're
Yeah.
introduced to each other.
I actually like that name. I don't know if I've heard this somewhere, like someone I know said it, but arranged love.
Oh, I like that.
Because
That's a good way
all they're
to
doing is
put it.
introducing you to someone who's a potential love interest. And then if that
Yes,
leads
there
to
you
marriage,
go.
sure.
Yeah. There's a New York Times article called "Love and Marriage: South Asian American Style" by Sridhar Papu, and Papu describes multiple South Asian stories about living in the Western world, which is really interesting.
Oh.
Like how each different person who have different careers and how they deal with the cultural expectations of marriage and
Mm.
arranged marriage. This author also talks about the use of biodata slash resume. It's like another word for the
Uh-huh.
marriage resume, right? We
Yeah.
hear that a lot of with the matchmakers, and they use that as like a way to share information between potential love interest, right?
Hmm. Like
And the
Simanti
author,
does.
yes, Imanti does. And I know that show always cracks me up because I'm like, wow, this is like extreme. Like I'm watching
That
this
show
from the
makes
as an
me mad.
outsider.
It makes me mad, but I still watch it.
It's a good show. I will say it's lots of
Yes.
drama and a good show.
Yeah. Makes me really mad. Like I'm yelling at the TV, but it just wants to like draw you in still.
I know, I know. Um, and the author also discusses people's points of view about how arranged marriage doesn't have to be extreme, like we talked about, right?
Mm.
It's more like introductions. One of the people the author describes says that arranged marriage is like, quote, like dating fully endorsed by our families, end quote. I like what you said, like real life dating instead of online dating, and that's what one of the person that the author describes viewpoints were.
Mm.
So I also found a Psychology Today article, right? Of course, I love
On
Psychology
like
Today,
South
I guess.
Asian?
Yes, it's
Oh my
called
gosh, tell me. Okay.
South Asian relationship status colon
Oh,
complicated. And this was
okay.
also written by a South Asian writer. Um,
Mm.
and I loved how this author kind of explains kind of the methodology behind maybe the thinking behind of South Asian families when it comes to expectations of marriage. There's like overall like an approach that a lot of overarching theme that a lot of South Asian families have, right? Like number one,
Uh,
focus on career. Number two, get married at the right age. And number three,
uh-huh.
have children shortly after. I feel like that's like a pretty standard that a lot of
Yeah. Blueprint.
people, yeah, like the blueprint, right?
Mm.
Um, and I think I love that this author goes into the why. And she goes, while some parents may have repressed traumas from their own relationships, they remain in denial as they urge their children towards marriage. Even if
Yes.
parents are insistent on marriage, the pressure can come from well intentioned family friends, aunties, and uncles, as they are
Mhm.
called to inquire incessantly about a child's relationship status.
Oh
I thought
my
that was
goodness.
pretty interesting, and
Yes.
how marriage is a status symbol in the South Asian community. You're not fully an adult when you're married.
Mm.
Comparison is very common, right? Your cousin got married, or you're at your cousin's marriage. Who you're next? What about you? Right? Like a lot of those questions
Yeah.
come up. So I thought that was just this article was so interesting to me. Um, and there was a quote that this author shared by an individual named Monica, age 30. And this
Mm.
individual said, my family expects me to find someone soon. They think I'm getting too old and at age
Mm.
30. Right. And I feel like I hear
Mm.
that a lot.
Yeah.
Um, I
Mm.
just, it's unfortunate of how much pressure people face when
Mhm.
it comes to that. And usually it has to do with the third methodology approach that we talked about, which was having children. You're getting too old to have children, so you need to
Yeah.
get married,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Oh my gosh, it's so funny. I literally today, all of my sessions today, all of them were talking about this exact thing of like
Really?
the pressures of like the expectations, like regardless of what your parents went through, absolute denial of that. It's all about, yeah, but like that did what the, that relation, no, no,
Mm-hmm.
nothing happened over there. When are you
Mm-hmm.
getting married?
Yeah.
And like, if
Yeah.
not that, exactly that, right? Exactly what you said. If not that, then like pressure from other people in the family, whether it's them directly pastoring you
Mm-hmm.
or, bringing it up with the parents of like, well, why
Mm-hmm.
not? When's the right
Mm-hmm.
time? Like, it's happening. Let's, like, what are you doing? Help her find someone.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. It is like
I
so
know.
prevalent.
It is very prevalent, I will say.
Yeah.
Um, and then the last thing I wanted to share when it comes to background was this really cool college honors program article called Love Ajkal, an exploration of South Asian American romantic relationship beliefs and behaviors by Isha Mehta. And
Uh-huh.
this is the honors program at UT Austin. Woohoo, hook'em.
Ooh.
And I know, right? I was like, woohoo,
I
represent.
love that.
But I thought, so this Mehta surveyed 18 to 25 years old individuals in order to understand how socialization of South Asian Americans into two differing cultures impact their perceptions of romantic relationships. So this has kind of like this author kind of goes into marriage and a lot of like historical information about the traditions and beliefs in South Asian culture with marriage. But I love that this author did a survey with between 18 to 25-year-olds about their perceptions as South Asian Americans. And so I'll share some of the results. There's like a lot, but I want to like share some themes. So the study participants discussed receiving messages from the parents or the community, South Asian community, about the necessity of emphasizing education and career-related goals over romantic relationships. So in the beginning, right? Like, oh, you're not allowed to date. You need to focus on school. You need to do this. But then afterwards, you're expected to know how to date.
Why aren't you dating yet? Why aren't you married yet?
So that was interesting. That was an overarching theme. Another theme that was shared in the responses was the abrupt shift from being told to avoid romantic relationships to being pestered about marriage and marriage prospects.
Oh my God,
so I think that's so prevalent, it seems like, when it comes to the South Asian community, is that these pressures are ongoing. And I'm sure, right, it's not ill-intentioned, right? You want your child to
hopefully
have a happy, successful life in your definition, which is settling down maybe and finding someone, having a family, whatever your happy definition is, right? But again, like I feel like when you're told to do everything except think about relationships and romantic relationships, and of course it's going to be difficult to, find someone, or another thing, secrecy comes around, which we talked about in our dating podcast, right? Like the secrecy around dating happens, which, I have experience with, so.
You're just like, I have experience with that.
I'm guilty of it. But it's true, right? Like, I feel like more than half the South Asian people I know, especially when I was in high school and college, like the parents didn't know about their romantic relationship. And it was just the norm. Like it wasn't even like questioned. It was assumed unless told otherwise,
exactly.
right?
It's expected that it's a secret unless you say, oh yeah, my mom knows. And it's like, oh, okay. That's more of a shock, if anything.
Yeah. So that's kind of like my background. I know that was a lot. Do you have any other thoughts
that was really
you wanted
cool.
to bring
I loved
to the
all
table?
of this information though. Very, very cool.
Yes, and I know. I was like, when I was digging, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. That's why I wanted to include everything, because I was so like surprised and interested by so many different things.
I know. I love it. This is a pretty big topic though. I mean, especially in the South Asian community, marriage is such a big deal. I feel like that it's just, there's a lot on it, on like expectations, on experiences, and like hopes even.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of marriages, you're getting married this year.
I am. I'm in the middle of it.
I know. You're like planning and making things happen.
Yes.
So tell me about it. I'm actually really, really excited to hear. I feel like I know a little bit, but I don't like really know the backstory of your journey to marriage. So I'm ready for it. I'm ready for the tea.
Well, I'm going to start earlier a little bit and then go into my story. Okay. So
build the suspense for me.
Growing up and then like hearing stories, I've seen this quite a bit, like the expectations and pressure, or like arranged marriage. My parents actually, what I would count their marriage as like an arranged love marriage, like what we talked about, or arranged marriage / like going into love. And it's like, I don't know if I've ever told you this story. I don't think I have, where my mom actually like said no to the arranged marriage twice before saying yes.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it's a really interesting story. So my mom did nursing school in Pakistan and my dad did engineering, a little bit of in Pakistan and then also like in the US in like New Jersey. And at the first time they were introduced to each other, which was like one network channel, like one mutual network. So I think it was just like a family member. So they like called like my dad's, one of his family members called my mom's brother and kind of said, hey, there's someone that we know that would like to get married. Like, are you guys interested? And my mom was like, didn't even ask for the name, didn't ask for a picture or anything. She just said no because she wanted to focus on her education, her school. And then maybe like a little bit after, second time, another channel of network, like another introduction, completely different people. I think this time my dad saw my mom's picture, but my mom didn't hear anything, didn't see his picture, didn't hear her name or his name. And they like, again, she said, no, I'm not ready. But he was a yes, my dad. And then I think my mom was studying abroad in Canada, and my dad also, and she was staying with her cousin in Canada, and my dad's uncle lives in Canada, and they like met. And that's how they found, like, they were like, okay, I have my niece, I have my nephew, right? Like all of that. And so my mom was in Canada, not too far from New Jersey. So my dad like flew over, and that's when they met. And then they went on they dated, right, for that 6 months or whatever, and then got engaged. And so that was, their arranged marriage. And at that time, when I was hearing the story from my mom, right, like she was telling me that she was pressured a lot, where they like that she needs to get married. That was her goal. Like she needed to give up and leave nursing school and go get married and settle down. And it's so amazing to hear her story because she stood her ground. She was alone and she was like, no, I'm going to finish my school because that's what I want to do. And then I'm going to get married. So I was like, already I was seeing, like, hearing and not seeing, obviously not seeing. Oh my gosh. Hearing about, like in the early stages of my life, like my mom would tell me the stories and she would tell me like, oh, like I came to the US and I had to take my nursing I had to do nursing exam all over again, like, all of that. And she was so persistent. Like even after I was born, she had to complete more
It's
requirements for
incredible.
nursing, and she did it. And that was so amazing to see how she did have different priorities. And her family didn't, though. Her family's first priority was marriage, that she needs to be like married off and like settle down and all of that. And she was like, no, like I'm not ready for that. And I love that. It
That's
was so
amazing.
cool. Like, especially in my parents' generation, like you don't see that a lot.
Yeah.
I feel like we see that a
Right.
lot in our generation, but or even like, one before us. But I feel like our parents' generation, I don't hear that a lot, where
That's so
instead they have to
inspirational.
sacrifice their own
Amazing.
studies. Yeah.
Right.
So kudos to
Yeah.
my mom for that.
Yay, go
Um, I
Auntie.
know.
That's so
Um,
amazing.
yeah, I know. I was like, wow, like that's inspirational. Like,
I know. I had no
right?
idea, but that is so inspirational. I'm like,
Yeah.
go her for just saying like, no, I'm not ready, for like knowing what she wants. And
Mm-hmm.
then like standing her ground and making it actually happen. That's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing.
So now, years later, I'm dating to my current fiance, and it was, of course, a secret in the beginning, and told our families, met our families, and of course, our our dating life was over like 5 years, right? You know that, like, it was a long time, more time than what my parents expected. And so even in the beginning, when we first started dating, maybe a year in or 2 years in after my parents found out, I feel like not so much my dad, but like my mom, like they would kind of say like, hey, like, I don't know if the term was used, like, oh, girls shouldn't be roaming around. And that's something that I think
Okay.
my mom adopted, like from, where she grew up. But like
Sure.
here, dating is very common, whereas where she grew up, it's not.
Yeah.
And so she was like, oh, like you need to have a ring on your finger, or you need to have a mumita or bat bucky right away, because this is not acceptable in this society. And, that's when I did stand my ground with my mom. And I was like, no, like I need to figure out what my career is like, because I
Yeah.
know marriage is a responsibility too in our
Yeah.
culture. There's expectations that come with marriage. And I told my mom, like, I'm not ready for that. I'm not ready to have
Yeah.
another responsibility. I need to be responsible for myself right now, figure out my careers, figure out what I want to do. Because this was during the time when I was switching careers and I was still figuring out my life.
Right. Yeah.
And so I was like, no, not yet. you know? And so
Go,
finally, like, I
Michelle.
think year into my current job, like, or in my first year of my current job, we did the mumita, the batbaki, and my
Yeah.
mom finally was like, okay, it's marriage time. I've stopped getting I stopped getting the comments about the urgency of getting married.
Mm,
And I get it, right? Like, she was hesitant on telling the family to, like, it was just like my parents knew and not my
right.
extended family, because again,
Right.
she thought that
It's not official
it's not
and
official, so
what
we
that
don't need to
means.
tell the
Yeah.
extended family. And of course, like, I told my cousins
Mm,
and my close family members, like, that I'm
yeah.
close with, but their siblings and their extended family, they were like, no, no, no,
Right.
we
I get
can't tell
that.
them right away.
Well, you know what? Strong mom, strong daughter. It's
I know,
okay.
right? I was like, who are you talking to, mom? I'm your daughter.
I love
She
that.
knows too. She knows too. Like, I joke around with her and I'm like, I'm your daughter, you know? And she was like, yeah, yeah, I know.
She's probably secretly very proud, but also like, oh, come
Oh,
on. But
I
also, I'm
know,
so
I
proud.
know, I know. But, like, entering the engaged fiancé era and like figuring a wedding
Yeah.
planning era, I think it's just so crazy. Like, it is such a huge change, like, not a change. I don't want to say change, a huge adjustment. It's
Mm,
And, I'm excited to hear about your experience, being on the other side of the married life, because I feel like I'm seeing you outside, like, through the glass, right? Like, I haven't entered the door yet of the married
yeah,
life.
you're like peeking.
I know I'm about to step in. But, like, I don't know. I feel like I've gone through a lot of emotions about,
Yeah.
like, what, the marriage and the pressures that can come sometimes with marriage. Like,
Mm,
sometimes my mom, like, tends to tell me, and I don't agree with this, like, oh, like, you're going to have another family. They're going to be priority to you now. And I'm like, no, like,
mm,
I have two families, and, you know, both will be my priority.
mm,
But she's saying things like that, and like
yeah.
how these expectations come with marriage, and it's sometimes like it's hard to cope with. I'm just like, it's because it's an adjustment, right? Like,
Yeah.
um and it kind of sometimes makes me want to cherish the time I'm spending with my parents even more
Yeah.
now, right? Like, I'm wanting
Mm,
to visit home more often. I want to be with my mom more often. I want to hug her more often, you know
mhm.
um so it's so interesting. I never expected to react during this time this way. Like, it's a very happy time, but I feel like it's an
Yeah.
emotional part too, where I'm just like,
Yeah.
those
The big
pressures and those
transition.
expectations. Yeah, it's an adjustment,
Yeah.
it's a transition. You're right.
Mm,
Of, like, and I'm really excited to be, joining a family and having I have two families instead of one, right? Like, I never grew up with grandparents, and my fiance's grandparents are like the best ever. They're so loving. Like, his grandma, like, kisses my forehead, and I love it all the time. She, like,
oh,
always, like, gives me hugs and prayers and blessings, and it's really, really
so
sweet.
sweet.
So I feel
Mm,
very grateful, and I feel very, very thankful. But I feel like when people's, like, how people, like, not so much nowadays, but in the back in the day, like, they would leave their home, like, physically move
yeah. Yeah.
sometimes across the country or leave the country to come here, right?
Mm,
Like, all of that.
yeah. It's
Or, like,
very
when we
official.
attend weddings here, they're like, the bride is
Mm,
sad, or the bride's family is sad. Like, I
mhm.
think, when I was younger, I didn't think of anything of it. Like, oh, like, why
Mm,
why is there sadness? But, like, I think I'm starting to understand why there is that sadness, because there's some symbolism behind it. And that there's, like, you
yeah.
know,
There's a history behind the idea, even if it's in the modern world, maybe not
mhm,
as drastic.
yeah,
There's still, like you said, it symbolizes like an actual
mhm,
transition, though. It does.
mhm, yeah. And,
Mm,
when it comes to, like, decisions to make when in marriage and weddings, I just see, like, around me too, my friends are married, like, sometimes those decisions can be, like, the parents want to have a say in those decisions too, whereas we might
yeah.
not expect them to have a say in. And that's really
Mm,
interesting on how to navigate that,
mhm.
how to set your boundaries, how not to set your boundaries. I'm
Yeah.
learning all the things.
All the things, good. All the things,
Yeah.
very important.
Yes. But yeah,
Yeah.
like, the biggest thing my fiance and I tell each other is, like, it's really important for us to be on the same page. no matter what. Like, we're a
Mm-hmm.
team. And I think that's really helped
Yeah.
us to help bring our decisions forward to help. And if they don't match our parents' decision, we find a way to compromise. But me and him are like,
Yeah.
a joint front. And I think that's been
Yeah.
really helpful
I love that.
to navigate those expectations and pressures.
I
Yeah.
love that. That's so important, though. It really is.
Mm-hmm.
Because even though
Yeah.
we do come from a very collectivist culture, even within that collectivist culture, there still is such an important of like you and him are like the team first and
Mm-hmm.
foremost. And then
Mm-hmm.
beyond that team, we can be a larger team with everybody else, but you two are like the team first.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's been
I
like
love that.
the most helpful, that ideology, when it
Mm.
comes to facing all these different expectations and pressures. And there's, of course, like well
Yeah.
meaning behind it and well intentions and excitement behind
Mm.
it and importance
Yeah.
behind it and family values. Um, but I'm excited to keep moving forward.
Yay. I'm so
Yeah.
excited. And I'm so
Yes.
excited for you in this journey because honestly, like, it is such a big milestone. I mean, it just is, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
important to you as an individual or just like in our culture and our
Yeah.
society. It just
Yeah.
is such a big moment because it is kind of a blending of who you like choose
Mm-hmm.
to be with, but also
Yeah.
like this extended family. You're adding a whole big family to your family, and
Mm-hmm.
like that's such a
Mm-hmm.
big deal. And
Mm-hmm.
even if nothing like on the day to day really changes, symbolically, like you said, there is such a significance to this change, and it's a fun time, an emotional time, but a fun time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's where I am at right now.
Mm, gotcha. I love it. I love that. And
Yeah.
to your point, I know, like, especially as a modern woman in a modern
Mm-hmm.
time, in a
Mm-hmm.
modern family, you are also navigating holding that modern with the traditional.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
I think it's definitely important to acknowledge that is a hard thing to do. It's a really hard thing to
Mm-hmm.
do.
Mm-hmm. Biculturalism at its finest.
Exactly. This is such a huge example of like straddling those two cultures and those
Mm-hmm.
two differences. They really
Yeah.
do come to highlight because we don't really align. Most of us don't really align with like the traditional side, but maybe the very modern side also feels a little icky. So
Mm-hmm.
finding that middle it's a journey.
Yeah, it is for sure.
But I know you got this. Good luck. I believe in you.
Thanks. Thanks. I
We'll do
appreciate
some
it.
off the pod talks about it if you need.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Heart.
But listening to your story though, like, it never fails to surprise me like how similar our stories are. And I don't know if that's
Really?
just like we gravitate because we're friends, so we gravitate towards similar stories, or
Mm-hmm.
like I don't know if it's just like a South Asian thing, but maybe a bit of both. you know, Growing up, my parents had they had what I would call a love arranged.
Mm.
Instead of an arranged love, I'm calling it a love arranged because they
Interesting.
grew up together actually. Like they knew of
Oh.
each other, grew up together kind of, and they fell in love, and they didn't really like date. My mom was too like guilt shame ridden to like actually
Yeah.
date at the time,
Yeah.
but like she dated. Like they went to the
Mm.
temple together. It's so cute and wholesome.
Oh, that's really sweet. I like that.
I know, how cute. And then they got like their like siblings involved
Mm-hmm.
in getting them to be an arranged marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And this, like, to this day, my parents will still say, "Nuh-uh, it was an arranged marriage. This was not a love marriage." So to this day, for whatever reason, they refuse to call it that. But it was definitely, I got the secret out once I got married. I like weaseled my way into the story time.
Nice.
It was a
Nice.
love arranged marriage.
Mm.
So I think maybe that's why, but it was a huge shock to me. But I think I shared this on the podcast before, actually. My parents never expected me to like have an arranged marriage. They
Mm-hmm.
kind of were like, she'll find someone when the
Yeah.
time is right. I'm like,
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. And I did, and I already kind of shared with you the very interesting and funny experience of what it was like to go through the dating process and bring my
Mm-hmm.
parents into the fold. It was funny, interesting, good times, stressful times.
Mm-hmm.
But my parents are, as like modern as they are, they're also pretty traditional in a lot of ways.
Mm,
And um, the one big no-no that I'm sure you can relate and a lot of people can relate to is like no living together before
mhm,
like you're
mhm,
married. Not even
mhm.
engaged, like just straight up married. And
Yeah.
so, it's kind of silly to say, but honestly, I was never pressured into getting married by my parents. They just wanted to know that we had the intention of getting married because, again, like you
Mm,
said, they weren't really they would yes, they kind of dated, but like they never really like dated, right? And so the
mhm.
idea was really foreign, and like mom even hated saying, I told you mom even hated saying the word like boyfriend and girlfriend, like
Yeah.
dating.
Yeah.
She was like, just say
Yeah.
you're hanging out.
Yeah.
So that idea was just so uncomfortable for them. But the one thing they made sure I knew was like, okay, like make sure you're serious about each other, and like, okay, then we'll meet their parents, like vice versa. But same thing, like they didn't want to tell anybody unless it was official
Mm,
because, again, like there's a kind of a stigma, and
yeah.
so they were like, unless it's real, like I don't want to, let's not tell anybody. So I wasn't allowed to, like, for example, like post pictures on social media, or like I had to like not follow people to do that. Um, as an example of like how secret it was. But even so, there was still like no pressure of like, you have to get married now.
Mhm.
You've dated long enough. Like, let's get married. It wasn't like that. It was more so maybe from like grandparents, I would say. The idea of like, okay, I think it's time to get married. You
Mhm.
guys have been dating long enough. When are we going to
Mhm.
set the dates? So my grandmas were more the one who were kind of pushing for that, but I didn't. It
Oh,
it wasn't really a
yeah.
pressure for me.
Okay.
I was kind of just like, yeah, of course grandma wants me to get married. She
Yeah.
just wants it to my wedding. Like, all right, whatever.
Yeah.
It wasn't a pressure for me, but what I did feel pressured about was um Avi and his parents are a little bit more on the modern side. And so they were kind of like, you guys are basically at each other's places all the time. You hang out all the time. Why don't you just like live together? Like, why waste money,
Mm,
kind of a thing. And so I felt I was kind of in the middle of both of those worlds, with
that's interesting.
understanding the logistical like
Mhm.
side of it, but at the same time like recognizing that was definitely a big like no for my
Mhm.
parents. I think one time his parents had suggested it. And I'm pretty sure my parents, I don't know if they were so in shock, they didn't even acknowledge it. They were just kind of like just like looking
That's
everywhere
so
else.
funny. They like
I
laugh it
know. I
off or
don't
something.
Yeah, exactly. They just kind of like laughed it. I think my dad laughed it off, and I think my mom was just too shocked to say anything. I think she just like
Oh my goodness.
it was so funny. But it is such a big like thing for them. And so I know it sounds a little silly in retrospect, and I do definitely not recommend this, but we got married because we were like, all right, well, logistically, we should just live together. So let's just get married. That was literally the rationale behind that. I mean, of course, we knew we were going to get married at some point, but we sped
Yeah.
up the timeline because we were like, yeah, I mean, I guess why wait, right? So
Mhm.
literally, as you know, as soon as we graduated, we didn't even walk for our graduation. As soon as we graduated, we had our plans to go to India and get married there. And like,
Mhm.
it was all very like quick and actually quite in the reverse. I had a lot of people telling me, why are you getting married so young?
Mm.
Can you believe that? I had the
That's
reverse problem.
interesting.
I
Interesting.
know, which is a good thing. I think it's a good thing because I think it shows that people are more comfortable with people getting married a
Yeah.
little later. So I
Yeah.
I wasn't like offended by that, but I was a little bit shocked like, like I don't know, I just am.
Yeah.
you know. Um yeah, so for me getting married wasn't really a pressure in the traditional sort of sense.
Mhm.
More so it just felt right time. If I
Mm.
could do it over, like Adi and I have talked about it a lot, and like if we could do it over, we wouldn't be pressured into getting married early because I feel like we had a lot of growing up to do, and
Yeah.
luckily we're able to do that growing up together. But
Yeah.
still, like there was some things that we wish we could have done being like together, but on our own, like living
Yeah.
individual-ish lives that
Yeah.
we didn't quite get to experience. So, you know, for me, ideally, I would have liked to have been able to either not care that we live separately or been able to tell my parents, like, you don't have to tell anybody else about it. Like, it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
You know? Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And then after I got married, I've been fortunate and privileged enough to have in-laws who are just so sweet, and like,
Oh.
they don't really have a lot of expectations of me, really. They just kind of treat me like their, daughter. They just treat me like,
Yeah.
with no like expectations of, oh, you should do this, oh, you should do that, oh, this is your role. Like, I don't have any of
Mm-hmm.
that, which I feel pretty fortunate about, because a part of me always kind of did wonder, like,
Yeah.
what would your in-laws be like? You never know,
Mm-hmm.
right? What kind
Mm-hmm.
of expectations someone would have of you when you're married.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um so there were really no expectations of me except for one thing. And this was an expectation, not just like my in-laws and in-laws like side of the family, but like my family and everybody. Can you
Mm-hmm.
guess what it is, Michelle?
Having a child.
Yeah. Having a
I'm
child,
like, ding, ding,
literally.
ding.
I know. 10 points
Having a
to Gryffindor.
kid.
You got it.
Yeah.
Honestly, though, like, the day after we got married, we had like a ratham, like a puja thing, a
Mm-hmm.
ritual, and I think it was my dad. I hope he was joking. Okay, I'm just gonna chalk it up to he was so tired, but he was like, "Now we gotta get a grandchild," and I was like, "Oh my god, Dad,
Oh
stop it,
my gosh, the
stop!"
day after, day one of marriage, it begins.
I was like, "No, no, no," which
Oh.
is funny because like I told you, Dad's more like, you make your choices. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not swaying you, but he did
Yeah.
say what he said that day. But other than him, like, in general, like, everybody has the same concern of like, okay, like, what are you waiting for?
Yeah.
You're married. You need to have kids soon. What are you doing? Have
Yeah.
kids before it gets harder to have kids, before blah, blah, blah. And again, I'm sure that all comes from a well-intentioned place. They
Mm-hmm.
just want to see kiddos running around, and like, that's all great. But it is a pressure, though, because for a
Yeah.
while, especially in the beginning, it did feel like a lot of pressure to constantly hear that,
Yeah.
because it kind of fed into my own fears, but like, fears that didn't need to be there, but that just felt larger and like more pressing because of how often the external reminders existed of like, timeline, timeline, timeline. Like, you got a biological clock ticking, like, let's
Yeah.
go. And it's like,
Yeah.
I'm okay, probably. But the
Yeah.
fears were really ramping up with all the reminders and that expectation to have a child, and like, have it now, have it soon, have it
Yeah.
before
That's
you're
a lot of
30. And like, what are you
pressure.
waiting
Yeah.
for?
That's a lot of
Yeah,
pressure for
it
sure.
really is. But other than that, like, that's like the one big thing. And I feel like I can handle that. That just takes a
Yes, you
quick little
can.
conversation of like, yeah, I'm still a baby. I'm taking care of myself.
Yeah. You set those boundaries,
But
ma'am.
especially with something that life-changing, I feel like you have
Yes.
to. You have to.
Yes. But you're
Yeah.
not the only person who's shared that with me. Like literally right
Mm,
after
that doesn't
marriage. Like
surprise
the
me.
pressure, about having a child. Like it's so prevalent.
And it's so fast. Like, that's
Mhm.
what's so
Mhm.
shocking, is like how
Mhm.
quickly it becomes about that next
Mhm.
thing. I feel like
Yeah.
at this point, some people just say it to just say it. Like, it's more of just like a
Yeah.
joke now,
Yeah.
which kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I do feel
that's like
like
a whole
that it
nother
is.
topic I'm sure we can talk about is just like the how comfortable people feel in the South Asian community to make comments about your life and
Mhm.
question, right? Like
Oh, girl, that's a whole topic.
I know I'm like, I'm gonna put that in our whatever topics maybe. Hint, hint, foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing. Pop quiz later.
Yes. But
um,
like
yeah.
who are you to tell me what I should
Mhm.
do with my body and how I should live my life,
Mhm. Yeah. But they don't
Especially
really
like
see it
if
like
they're
that.
not even like a close relative or family member that
Yeah.
you've or a loved one, like
Oh my
some
God,
random
that
person in the community,
especially.
right? Like when is it
So
your
annoying.
turn? Or like when is this? When is that? And I'm like, ma'am or sir.
I don't even know you like that.
Yeah.
I know, it's crazy, but it's so true. And I feel like a part of it is maybe because of like the collectivist thing, but I do feel like people have a sense of like, this is a really strong word, but like, I feel like people have a sense of almost like ownership of like
Mm-hmm.
you, if they know you, or like if
Mm-hmm.
they've seen you when you were a child, they almost feel like Yeah, I can say this to
familiar,
you.
yeah,
Why
like a
can't I?
familiarity,
Yeah.
like, oh, I've basically been part of the village of raising you.
Yeah.
So, and that's
Yeah.
beautiful in of its own. Like, I feel like I share that connection with a lot of people, like in the community I grew up in. Like, whenever I visit home, like I make sure to say hi to them or hug them, like, but again, like that has its own extents too and limits
Yeah.
when it comes to like
Hmm.
intimate decisions and intimate discussions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
like we talked about, in a different podcast, like you just never know what's going on with someone's life too. So
Mhm.
like some of
Mhm.
these things might seem like
Mhm.
normal or like okay to say, but you don't know what's going to be a trigger for somebody. And like
Mhm.
why risk accidentally hurting somebody? Just
Yeah.
we don't need to do that.
Yeah. No, I'm
It's
so proud of
avoidable.
you for,
Yeah.
standing your ground and knowing what you want. That's awesome.
I wouldn't say I know what I want, but I'm working towards that.
But you're standing your ground on where you are. There you
Yeah.
go. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like you have to though, I mean, if you don't, you are forever changing your life
Mhm.
over
Yeah.
what someone else wants for your life.
Yeah.
And then what? Like it's too late. Like what would you do with that then,
Yeah.
Other than live
Yeah.
in resentment.
And that's
We
not
don't
good.
want that.
We don't
We don't
want
want
that.
that. No. But yeah, other than this like one particular expectation and like somewhat of a pressure I feel to have a kid, although I have noticed it's kind of like decreased actually. It was a lot
Okay.
more in the beginning of the marriage and like for some reason it's kind of just dropped off.
Okay.
I don't
That's
know why,
good.
but I'm not complaining.
Maybe
I'm not sure
everyone's
this
picked another
reason.
couple to look at the community.
It's so funny. Yeah, I suppose. And in
Yeah.
another sense, what I'm also really grateful for not having a pressure or an expectation is my mother-in-law raised my husband to be very like independent.
Mm.
Like she raised him to know how to do chores. And like, oh my God, I love her
Oh,
for it so much
that's so good.
because I wasn't raised that way. We've talked about this. Like my parents
Yeah.
were like study, 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 no chores for you. So
Yeah.
I like stumble my way through chores. I don't have a discipline here,
Yeah.
but he does. And so
That's so good.
the funny thing is when we moved into this home, like I built the furniture for the most part, like
Oh,
the little
nice.
things that I could do on my own. I build it because he always finds one little shelf or one little piece to like mess up. So I'm in charge of building and he's in charge of the kitchen. That's what we've
I love
assigned our
it.
roles as.
Reverse the roles. You guys are
I
breaking
love
so many cycles just by being
it.
yourselves. I love it.
Just work to your strength. Work to your strength.
Yes, that's what matters.
Yeah.
So
So I
cool.
feel like expectations wise, I've been fortunate enough not to have um, other expectations that sometimes can feel like an obligation. But in
Yeah,
other ways, there's some common things we can't escape from, like being,
exactly.
being poked at to have a kid and like when are you
Mhm.
going to have one and
Mhm.
when
I know.
and
I'm
why
like,
and where.
is that going to start day one of after
Yeah.
being married?
Good luck, babe.
I'm like,
Good
should I be
luck.
prepared?
Yeah, babe.
Thanks for the heads up.
100%. You're welcome.
Appreciate
I
it.
got
Appreciate
you.
it.
Yeah.
Oh.
But it's, I feel like certain expectations, I mean, that's just a part of life.
Mhm.
Expectations are a part of life for the
Mhm.
people we care about. And I guess also random aunties and uncles. We just have expectations and that's
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah.
But I think that line that we need to be able to walk is as long as the expectation is coming from a place of love, just take it with a grain of salt of like, okay,
Yeah.
this is coming from love. Does it work for me? Does it not work for me? And then just doing
Mhm.
what works for you still, having those boundaries.
Yeah.
And if it's not coming from a place of love, then definitely not taking those on.
Mhm. That makes
Yeah.
sense to me. That's a
Well,
good
I'm
way to
proud of
look at
you.
them. I'm proud of you.
I'm proud of you. I'm
I'm
excited
proud
for
of you.
you. It's a big year for you.
I know. I know. And we have our podcast, like, all the
I know.
things. All
So
the
many things happening.
things. 2023. Woohoo.
It's all coming at Michelle.
Yeah. No, I'm like that was good. I thank you for sharing your experience. I appreciate it.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
it's helpful to hear like, from your point of view, being
Mm-hmm.
into marriage and what that can look like. Because I will say
Yeah.
my mom has prepared me in her own way, traditional way of like,
Mm.
expectations will come, things will change, and maybe that has played a role, right, in how I
Mm.
feel. But it's
Yeah.
nice to hear from, you as well, like going through it as like firsthand in the
Mm.
now of how
You know,
it
it's
is.
so interesting you bring that up. That reminds me, when I was getting married, there's this tradition in, I don't know if this is in all Hindu weddings, but like in our particular style of Hindu wedding, I guess, there's
Mm-hmm.
this thing we do. It's called a, I think it's called a kalyanam. I know, maybe I'm thinking of it wrong. I don't know. Basically, what it is you like symbolically and like metaphorically and physically give away the bride to the other
Mm-hmm.
family.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it's not called calling them. I don't know what it's called. But anyways, it's the process of basically saying you are no longer part of this family, you're part of this family. And I knew a little bit about the process of what would entail the wedding steps and everything. And that was one of the first things I told my mom. I was like, we are like, hell no, we are not doing this piece of this. You will take it out. Like, no questions. Like, it's just
Yeah.
happening. We're not
Yeah.
doing this. And so she was like, she was a little taken aback, and then she was like, yeah, of course I'm not going to do it.
That's good. That's good.
And it was so funny because actually during the wedding, like you said, sometimes in the past, especially, like there's just so much sadness at the end of the wedding of what it means to symbolically leave, or, maybe if you do that part of the ritual, really leave.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't like that for us. I feel like my mom got her tears out of the way during the mehndi.
Oh,
And then,
tea.
of course, Adi was sitting right next between me and her, and then telling her, "You're being so silly, Auntie. We're literally going to be in Dallas with you. What are you talking about? If anything, you're taking me away from my mom."
Oh,
And just like, making her feel better and like kind of cracking jokes.
yeah.
And obviously, like, mom knew that, right? But
Yeah.
that was like the day that she kind of let out her feelings. And like, obviously, seeing mom cry, I cried. But the
Yeah.
day of the wedding, when typically people cry, like, we were literally all just like laughing and smiling. And like, that's what I love about like this more modern times in the
Mm-hmm.
weddings, is like there's such a huge transition in recognizing that,
Yeah.
why do we have to choose? Why does the girl have to give up her family? Like, we don't
Exactly.
need to do that.
Yeah.
We
And
can have
times have
our
changed.
family and
Yeah.
add to that.
Yeah. It's funny that
Yeah.
you mentioned that ritual. I think like growing up in Muslim weddings that I've attended, and we're figuring out about this ritual for my wedding too. It's called the rukhsati, and it's saying
Mhm.
goodbye to your parents, the bride's
Yeah.
parents, and that's like another
Yeah.
symbolic. Like I've seen it in different ways. Like at the end of the reception, when the bride is leaving with the groom and his family, like
Mm.
they're like the bride's parents walk behind the bride while she's leaving and throws rice
Mm.
behind her. That like
Right. Yeah.
kind of symbolizes like abundance and love.
Mm.
I've seen like wrote like before the ceremony, the bride, as she's leaving her house, the parents, like as she's
Mm.
walking out the house, the parents are walking behind her, and then she's throwing like
Mm.
flower petals, and that's symbolic, like you're leaving
Mm.
the
Yeah.
house for the last time as an unmarried woman, and then the next time you
Mm.
come back will be as a married woman. And
Well, I like
it's
that distinction though. That's
yeah,
nice, as
yeah,
an unmarried woman, but you
yeah,
will be
yeah,
back. I like that
yeah,
distinction.
yeah. I know, right? That's how I viewed it. I wasn't told it. I was just like, oh yeah, that's how she's leaving, and then when she comes back, it'll be
Go,
married. But
Michelle.
I'm
I
sure
love
there's
it.
more details behind this and more
I'm
beliefs and
sure.
traditions. But that's what I've seen. My cousins that got married, like they're crying and doing the rice thing,
Yeah.
um, and so
Yeah.
yeah, that's in the works. We'll see. I do not want to do it, but we'll see how that
Mm.
plays out.
Yeah. And remember, even if it does happen, like, maybe it's okay to think of it as just a part of a
Yeah,
ritual. And for
yeah,
you, it just means that you are showering your parents with a different kind of
yeah.
love, adding to the
Yes,
family.
yes. Viewing it a different way. I like that
Yeah.
approach.
For us.
Yes, yes,
All right. Well, shall we wrap up?
yes. Do you want to wrap us up?
Alrighty, I will wrap us up. So, reminder, if our podcast has resonated with you and you'd like to share your story with us, any of your marriage pressures or expectations that you faced, or just kind of weigh in on some of our research if anything shocked you, that Michelle shared earlier, you can message us at our Gmail account, talksouthasiantome@gmail.com, or you can find us on all the socials at the handle @talksouthasiantome.
Yay. We're so
Alrighty. Well, then,
excited.
bye, everyone.
Bye.